Sure, here's your engaging and suspenseful YouTube video introduction. I never expected that an ordinary day at work would turn into something that would haunt me for years. As a nurse, I've seen a lot: pain, joy, heartbreak, and hope. But nothing quite like this. It started like any other shift, just another patient in need of care. But what happened next? I still struggle to wrap my head around it. He was admitted for something minor, nothing life-threatening, but he was visibly shaken. There was something about him, an unease, a nervousness that went beyond his physical condition. I could see it in his eyes, the way they darted around the room as if he were afraid of something or someone. At first, I brushed it off. Patients get anxious all the time. Hospitals can be overwhelming. But as I spent more time with him, I realized his fear wasn't about his health. It was something deeper. During one of my routine check-ins, he suddenly grabbed my hand. His grip was firm but desperate, as if he was holding on to me for dear life. "I need to tell someone," he whispered, his voice shaking, "but I don't know if I can." I paused, unsure of what to say. It wasn't uncommon for patients to confide in nurses, but the way he looked at me, it was as if he was on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump but hoping someone would pull him back. I sat down beside him, keeping my voice gentle. "You're safe here," I reassured him. "Whatever it is, you can talk to me." He hesitated, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to walk in. And then, in a broken voice, he told me the truth. A truth so shocking, so unexpected, that for a moment I thought I had misheard him. His confession poured out in whispers, his words rushed, his hands trembling. He had done something he deeply regretted, something that could destroy his marriage, his family, his entire life. I listened, my heart pounding, unsure of how to respond. But before I could say anything, something happened that changed everything. The door swung open, and standing there, eyes wide, was someone who should never have heard what he just said. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to see who had entered. It was a woman, mid-30s, well-dressed, with eyes that burned with suspicion. She froze in the doorway, her gaze darting between me and the man lying in the hospital bed. His face went pale, and for a long moment, none of us spoke. The air felt thick, charged with something heavy and unspoken. Then, in a quiet but sharp voice, she said his name, Daniel. His whole body tensed, and I could feel the panic radiating off him. He swallowed hard before forcing out a weak, "Hey, Emily." So, this was his wife. I felt an immediate shift in the energy of the room. It wasn't just the tension of a worried spouse seeing her husband in a hospital bed. It was something more, something unresolved between them. Her arms were crossed, her posture rigid, like she was holding herself back from saying something she had rehearsed 1,000 times in her head. "You weren't answering your phone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I had to call the hospital to find out where you were." Daniel didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he looked at his hands, gripping the blanket so tightly his knuckles turned white. I, I didn't want to worry you." She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "Worry me?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think disappearing for hours and ending up in a hospital doesn't worry me?" I shifted uncomfortably, realizing I was in the middle of something I probably shouldn't be. But before I could excuse myself, she turned to me. "Did he tell you?" I hesitated. "Tell me, what?" Her eyes narrowed. "That he's a liar." Daniel inhaled sharply, looking at her with a silent plea, but she wasn't done. "Did he tell you where he was before he got here? Or who he was with?" A cold chill ran through me. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to speak, but he didn't. He just sat there, staring at his hands, as if hoping that if he stayed quiet long enough, this would all go away. Emily let out a bitter sigh. Of course not, she muttered, because that's what he does. He hides, he lies, and when he gets caught, he acts like the victim. I could feel my heart beating faster. This wasn't just a worried wife visiting her sick husband. This was something much, much bigger, and I had just stepped into the middle of it. The silence between them was suffocating. I could feel the weight of something unspoken pressing down on the room, something too big to ignore, but too painful to confront head on. Emily's hands trembled at her sides, whether from anger or heartbreak, I wasn't sure. Daniel finally looked up at her, his eyes pleading, but he still didn't say a word. I knew I shouldn't be here for this. This was personal, but I also couldn't just walk away. I had been the one he confided in moments ago. I had seen the fear in his eyes, the regret, and now, watching his wife stand before him, waiting for answers she clearly already knew, I realized this wasn't just a story of betrayal. This was a story of consequences. Emily exhaled sharply, then turned back to me. You're his nurse, right? So you probably think he's a good guy. He's always been good at that, making people believe he's someone he's not. Daniel's jaw clenched, and for the first time, his voice had an edge to it. Emily, stop. Stop? She repeated, her voice breaking. You want me to stop? After what you did? After everything you've put me through? I saw the guilt flash across his face, but it wasn't just guilt, it was fear. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about infidelity. This wasn't just about a marriage breaking apart. There was something else, something neither of them was saying. And then Emily's voice dropped to a whisper, barely more than a breath. She called me Daniel. She told me everything. Daniel's face drained of color. My stomach tightened. Whoever she was, she had changed everything. Daniel's whole body stiffened. His breathing became shallow, his hands gripping the sheets like he was trying to steady himself. The room felt colder, heavier, like the weight of whatever secret he had been hiding was finally crashing down on him. Emily took a slow step forward, her voice low but trembling. You thought you could keep it from me, didn't you? That I'd never find out? She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. But she told me everything, Daniel. Every detail, every lie, every single time you snuck away thinking I wouldn't notice. I stood frozen, caught between them, feeling like I was watching something unravel that had been hanging by a thread for far too long. My mind raced. Who was she? Another woman? Someone close to them? The pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting together fast enough, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about trust that had been shattered beyond repair. Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily, please, we can talk about this. Her eyes flashed with pain. Talk? Now you want to talk? After I had to hear it from her first? She exhaled shakily, running a hand through her hair, trying to keep herself together. Do you even realize what you've done? He swallowed hard, but no words came out. That silence told me everything. He knew. He knew exactly what he had done. And then Emily's voice dropped even lower, filled with something deeper than just anger. You didn't just betray me, Daniel. She took another step closer, her hands clenched into fists. You betrayed us, and now there's nothing you can do to fix it. Daniel's face crumbled, and in that moment I knew whatever was coming next would change everything. Daniel's face was unreadable now, his mouth slightly open like he wanted to say something, but no words came. His eyes darted between Emily and me as if he was searching for an escape, a way to undo what had already been set in motion. But there was no turning back. Emily let out a shaky breath, rubbing her temples as if she was trying to hold herself together. She didn't just tell me what you did, Daniel. she finally said, her voice softer but somehow even more dangerous. She told me why you did it. Daniel's head snapped up. For the first time since she had walked in, true panic flashed across his face. Emily, stop, he said quickly, his voice raw. Please, don't do this here. My stomach tightened. There was something more, something bigger than just a betrayal. Emily gave a hollow laugh, shaking her head. Oh, now you care about where we talk? Now you want privacy? After everything you've done? She took a deep breath, and then, without breaking eye contact, she said, She's pregnant, Daniel. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. The heart monitor beside him beeped steadily, the only sound in the deafening silence that followed. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just an affair. This was something permanent. Daniel's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His hands trembled as he ran them through his hair, his entire body deflating. It was as if every excuse, every denial, every last bit of control he had left had just slipped through his fingers. Emily's eyes were filled with something beyond anger now, pain, exhaustion, heartbreak. You were never going to tell me, were you? She whispered. You were just going to let me live my life, believing the lies, thinking we could fix this? Daniel exhaled sharply, rubbing his face, his voice barely audible. I didn't know how. Emily shook her head, stepping back as if she couldn't stand to be near him. You knew how, Daniel. You just didn't want to. She turned to me then, and for the first time, I saw tears forming in her eyes. Did he tell you that part? I didn't know what to say. I had barely processed the bombshell myself. But before I could speak, Daniel's phone buzzed on the bedside table. All three of us looked at it. The screen lit up. It was a message from her, and it read, We need to talk. It can't wait. The phone buzzed again. The sound cut through the thick silence like a knife. Daniel didn't move. He just stared at the screen, his face frozen in shock. Emily swallowed hard, then reached for the phone before he could. Her fingers trembled as she turned it toward her, reading the message. Her expression darkened. Without hesitation, she tapped the screen and answered the call. The line clicked, and for a moment there was only breathing on the other end. Then a hesitant voice, soft, unsure. Daniel? Emily's grip on the phone tightened. Number, it's me. A sharp inhale, then silence. I held my breath watching the scene unfold. Daniel reached for the phone, but Emily jerked away, her knuckles white. You need to tell me the truth, she said, her voice cold but cracking at the edges. All of it, now. A pause, and then the woman on the other end spoke. I'm sorry, I didn't know he was still lying to you. Daniel's entire body tensed. Stop, please, he begged, his voice breaking. Don't do this. But it was too late. Emily, he told me he was leaving you. The woman's voice was quiet, but the words hit like a sledgehammer. That you were already done, that you were only staying for appearances. Emily let out a shaky laugh, disbelief flashing across her face. That's what he told you? She turned to Daniel, her eyes burning with betrayal. You planned to leave me? Daniel ran his hands over his face, shaking his head. I didn't mean it like that. I didn't know how to fix this. The woman on the line hesitated. Emily, I think you should know something else. A deep breath. I'm not the only one. The room spun. The weight of her words crashed down like a tidal wave. Emily's lips parted, but no sound came out. Daniel's face turned ghostly pale. Emily exhaled, steadying herself. How many, Daniel? He didn't answer. He couldn't. That silence was enough. Emily placed the phone on the table, took one last look at the man she had once trusted, and then, without another word, walked out of the room. The door closed behind her with a soft click. And just like that, everything Daniel had tried to hide came crashing down. He buried his face in his hands, his whole body shaking. But there was nothing left to say. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it now. The room felt eerily quiet after Emily left. The only sound was the faint beeping of the heart monitor, steady and relentless, as if mocking the wreckage left behind. Daniel didn't move. He sat hunched over, his hands gripping his face, his shoulders shaking slightly. I wasn't sure if he was crying or just trying to breathe through the weight of everything that had just unraveled. I took a slow step back, unsure if I should say something or just let him sit in the silence of his own making. A part of me felt sorry for him. He looked utterly broken, like a man who had just realized he had lost everything. But another part of me knew that he had done this to himself. Every lie, every betrayal, every moment of deception had led to this exact moment. After a long pause, he finally whispered, "I never meant for it to get this bad." His voice was hoarse, barely more than a breath. He slowly looked up at me, his eyes hollow. "I swear, I didn't want to hurt her." I nodded, but I didn't respond. Because what could I say? That I understood? That it was okay? It wasn't. Some things couldn't be undone, and some wounds cut too deep to ever heal completely. His phone buzzed again, but this time, he didn't reach for it. He just stared at it, as if it was a reminder of the mess he had created, a symbol of everything that had fallen apart. The name flashed on the screen. Unknown number. He let out a bitter laugh. Guess I'll never know who else is waiting to tell me the truth. I exhaled slowly and glanced toward the door where Emily had disappeared. I hoped she would be okay. She deserved better than this. I turned back to Daniel, who was still staring blankly ahead, lost in thoughts I couldn't begin to understand. There was nothing left to say, no way to fix what had been broken. So I did the only thing I could. I walked away,